Salvete omnes. In this video, we'll be learning about the sequence of tenses. This refers to which subjunctive can be used in a subordinate clause, introduced by which tenses of the main verb. In our purpose clause and indirect command videos, you learned that when the introductory verb was present or future, the present subjunctive would be used in the purpose clause. And when the introductory verb was a past tense verb, the imperfect subjunctive was used in those clauses. Now that we know all forms of the subjunctive, we can look at these rules in more detail. In Latin, there are two sequences, primary and secondary. The sequence refers to how the verb before the subordinate clause affects which subjunctive can be used within the subordinate clause. Let's take a look at two purpose clauses with different introductory verbs before we get into the more detailed rules of the full sequences. In the purpose clause, discipuli ludum frequentant ut linguam latinam discant, the students attend school in order to learn the Latin language. Our introductory verb frequentant is in the present tense, which initiates primary sequence, and so the verb in the purpose clause must be in the present subjunctive. If we change the introductory verb to a past tense verb, our purpose clause becomes discipuli ludunt frequentabant ut linguam latinam discerent. Now, because our main verb frequentabant is in the imperfect tense, i.e. one of our past tenses, secondary sequence has been initiated, and so the verb in our purpose clause must be in the imperfect subjunctive. Both primary and secondary sequence are dependent upon the tense of the main verb of the sentence. Primary sequence is initiated if the main verbs are in the present, future, or future perfect tenses. So if you have one of these three tenses as the main verb of the sentence, and your sentence contains a subordinate clause with a subjunctive, the only tenses of the subjunctive that can be used in the subordinate clause are the present and perfect subjunctives. The difference between the two of these is as follows. If the action of the subordinate clause is happening at the same time as or slightly after the action of the main verb, the present subjunctive is used. So in purpose clauses, you have to achieve the action of the main verb before you can achieve the action of the purpose clause, i.e. the students have to attend school before they can learn Latin. And to show that the action of the main verb happens slightly before the action of the verb in the subordinate clause, the present subjunctive is used. The perfect subjunctive is used when the action of the subordinate clause has already happened before the action of the main verb. To illustrate this further, we're going to use an example of a subordinate clause you haven't met yet, the indirect question. The exact nature of this subordinate clause isn't important right now, but it does help to illustrate the differences really clearly. So let's take a sentence. Nescio quid agas. I don't know what you're doing. In this sentence, the main verb nescio is in the present tense, and so primary sequence has been initiated. But the subject you of the subordinate clause quid agas is doing something at the same time as I am in the dark about it. And therefore, agas, the present subjunctive, is used in the subordinate clause. If we change the sentence to nescio quid ageris, I don't know what you did, our main verb nescio is still in the present tense, and so primary sequence has still been initiated. But you did something before I didn't know what it was. And so to show that the action of ageris happened before the action of nescio, the perfect subjunctive is used. Let's take another example to illustrate it one more time. Let's say, scire volo kur kuras. I want to know why you're running. Should I be running? Is there danger coming? I need to know the reason. Here, because our main verb volo is in the present tense, primary sequence has once again been initiated. And you are running at the same time as I want to know why. Therefore, we use the present subjunctive to show the simultaneity of the action. But if we change the sentence to skire wolo kur kukureres, I want to know why you ran. Should I have run? Why didn't you tell me that I needed to run? Here, wolo is still present tense, and so it initiates primary sequence. But you ran before I wanted to know why. And so to show that the action of kukureres happened before the action of wolo, the perfect subjunctive is used in the subordinate clause. So to review the rules of primary sequence one more time, if the main verb of the sentence is in the present, future, or future perfect tense, you're in primary sequence. Within that subordinate clause in primary sequence, if the action happens at the same time or slightly after the main verb, you use the present subjunctive. And if the action happened in the past before the main verb, you use the perfect subjunctive. The verb tenses that introduce secondary sequence are the imperfect, perfect, and pluperfect tenses. So if the main verb of your sentence is one of these three tenses, and your sentence contains a subordinate clause with a subjunctive verb, the only tenses of the subjunctive that can be used are the imperfect and pluperfect subjunctives. Once again, if the action of the subordinate clause happens at the same time as or slightly after the action of the main verb, in secondary sequence, the imperfect subjunctive is used. So in the purpose clause example, the imperfect subjunctive is used because the students had to attend school before they could learn Latin. If the action of the subordinate clause happens before the action of the main verb, then the pluperfect subjunctive is used in secondary sequence. So let's look at our examples again. Nesciebam quid ageres. I didn't know what you were doing. Here, the main verb of our sentence, nesciebam, is in the imperfect tense, and so secondary sequence has been initiated. And you were doing something at the same time as I was in the dark about it. So to show that the action of the subordinate clause is happening at the same time as the action of the main verb, the imperfect subjunctive ageres is used. If we change the sentence to nesciebam quid egises, I didn't know what you had done, the main verb is still in the imperfect tense nesciebam, and so secondary sequence has still been initiated. But you had already done something before I didn't know what that was. And to show that the action of the subordinate clause happened before the action of nesciebam, the pluperfect subjunctive egises is used. Again, to take our second example, scire volui kur cureres. I wanted to know why you ran or were running. Here, the action of the subordinate clause is happening at the same time as the action of the main verb. And so our perfect tense verb volui has initiated secondary sequence, and to show the simultaneity of the action of the subordinate clause with the main verb, the imperfect subjunctive cureres is used. Change it to scire volui quid cucurises. I wanted to know why you had run. Again, volui is a perfect tense verb, so secondary sequence has been initiated, but you had already run before I wanted to know why. And so the pluperfect subjunctive, cucurises, is used to show past action in the subordinate clause. So to review the secondary sequence rules one more time, if the main verb of the sentence is in the imperfect, perfect, or pluperfect tenses, the imperfect subjunctive is used to show simultaneous action, and the pluperfect subjunctive is used to show past action. As always with these pop-up grammar extras, you do not need to know this for class. This is just if you're curious. Technically, the perfect tense can introduce both primary and secondary sequence, and this is because the perfect tense has two different aspects. The present perfect that translates as I have done, and the past perfect that translates as I did. The past perfect is by far the most common translation of the perfect tense, and it shows action that happened in the past and was completed. So for example, in the sentence, I ate a delicious meal last night. While you may still be thinking about how good that food was, the act of eating happened in the past and was completed. It's over and done with. But in response to the question, are you hungry? If you say, no, I've already eaten, there, even though you ate previously, the action of eating is still relevant in the present because you're feeling full and therefore don't want any food. The present perfect, when used in Latin, introduces primary sequence subjunctives. So, in the example, I have decided what I need to do, here the main verb I have decided is present perfect and therefore initiates primary sequence. In Latin, this would be constitui quid perficere debeam. And here the verb in the subordinate clause debeam is present subjunctive in primary sequence. Compare the sentence, I decided what I needed to do. I decided here is past perfect and therefore introduces secondary sequence. So the Latin for this sentence would be constitui quid perficere deberem, where the verb in the subordinate clause deberem is in the imperfect subjunctive in secondary sequence. So in this video, we learned that the tense of the main verb determines what tenses of the subjunctive can be used in subordinate clauses. We learned that the primary sequence is introduced by the present, future, and future perfect tenses, and that in subordinate clauses, the present subjunctive is used to show simultaneous action, and the perfect subjunctive is used to show past action. And that secondary sequence is introduced by the imperfect, perfect, and pluperfect tenses, and that in subordinate clauses, the imperfect is used to show simultaneous action, while the pluperfect subjunctive is used to show past action. You should now complete the exercise entitled Sequence of Tenses, which can be found in our learning management system. As always, if you have any questions, either rewatch the video or reach out to me via email. Valete omnes.